Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai. Welcome to this session of Marxism 2012, discussing tēnaranga, tēratanga, and the politics of Maori resistance. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Melbourne. Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge Socialist Alternative that we are co-hosting this conference with. We are the International Socialist Organisation of Aotearoa is very pleased to be here, very pleased to be able to have a couple of sessions. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge Andrew. He's giving the talk today. He's a long-term socialist and leading member of the International Socialist Organisation, the co-chair of the Mana movement in Ōtepoti, Dunedin, and a national delegate for the Engineers, Printers and Manufacturers Union. Thank you. I'll pass it over to Andrew.
Whare tūnei tēnā koe ki te marae tapoto mea tēnā koe ki te whanau Socialist Alternative tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui ki ngā tūpuna o tēnei whenua, Wurundjeri Bunurong, Kuri Nation. Ngā mihi nui ki ngā tūpuna o ngā iwi Maori. Ngā mihi nui tēnei rā ki ngā mate o 1916 to the dead of 1916. Ngā toa airihi. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm proud to be here as a representative of the International Socialist Organisation, as a unionist, as a member of Mana movement. I'm a white New Zealander, a Pākehā. I was born in South Africa. I was raised in the South Island, Te Waipounamu. And I'd like to pay my respect to the Zulu Nation, who have mana whenua in South Africa where I was born, to Kaitau, who have mana whenua where I live, and to the Kuri people of Melbourne, never ceded, never sold, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I'd like to also just start with some more acknowledgements to my co-chair of Mana movement in Ōtepoti, Aotearoa, who her tupuna come from both Kuri people in Australia, also Maniapoto of Aotearoa, of whom more later. Evan Poata Smith, who's a former member of the International Socialist Organisation, who wrote an entire thesis on this topic, which I've been very fortunate to work from. Also Whare Tutoa and various other Māori, Ropu Māori individuals, Māori whānau, who have shared so much with me over the years. When we stand on the shoulders of giants, we can see far. My aim in this talk is to provide you with an interesting history, to interest you, to inspire you with a history of resistance that you maybe haven't heard before, and to arm you in the fight against racism, and for real liberation, democratic, economic, and cultural. Why do I talk on Māori resistance for an Australian audience in Melbourne? Well, for a start, we're all internationalists. Yeah, no. For a second point, we're all Aussies. Well, at least 1/8 of all New Zealanders are Aussies, and 1/5, 20% of all Māori are Aussies. And I acknowledge also the people who are in this audience whose tupuna, whose ancestors this struggle belongs to, who, in a special way, are part of this struggle. And I'll just mention also Giselle from Aropu, who is Kaitahu as well. Also, a third reason is that we are part now, and very pleased to be part of the Mana movement, which won 14% of Māori votes in the last election. We have one MP and veteran leadership, Hone Harawira, other veteran activists, Annette Sykes, Angeline Greensill, John Minto, of course, Sue Bradford. It's a Māori-led party, and it's a party that's split on a clear class line. for working class and for the poor. Nonetheless, this doesn't mean that the revolution's around the corner. It's only one MP, and half of all Māori did not vote at all in the last election. So, you know. Nevertheless, we're very proud to be part of this very exciting new movement. And we've been sneered at quite a lot by Labour Party people, by reformists of various different kinds, and they call us Leninists for hone. They say that we've just jumped on the latest bandwagon, and to be honest, it's a very good bandwagon. We've got a great MP. We've got a strategic electoral focus on the Māori role, which is so far to the left that the Conservatives don't even bother to stand on. So it's a great electoral intervention. But it's not a bandwagon for us. Tino Rangatiratanga has been part of our program since we were formed almost 20 years ago. Even if we weren't always sure what we meant by it. And that's why we're so pleased to be part of Mana, because it's the practice that makes our theory make sense. And we're also very appreciative of the opportunity to be here and to explain to you, because that also clarifies our theory. To step outside of your country is the best way to look back and understand your own country. The basic thesis that I want to give to you today is the idea that it's impossible to have a revolutionary working class party in Aotearoa without the tradition of Māori resistance at its core. Reformists, the reformists who sneer at us, they see anti-racism in general as an app. You load it onto like your basic program, but uninstall it if it starts playing up. Uninstall it if it starts interfering with, you know, the basic running of your system. No? For Marx, it wasn't an app at all, it was hardwired into the system. A relentless struggle against chauvinism and all of its kinds was necessary to create a class that's capable of ruling. He talked about the division in England between the Irish and the English working class as the secret of the impotence of the English working class despite its incredible organisation, because English workers that accepted anti-Irish chauvinism also accepted the right of their rulers to rule them. Labour parties in general see colonialism as something that happened in the past. You know, like it happened, oh, it was terrible, but like it's done now. Now we've got a working class, and you know, working class on one side, capital on the other. But each working class in every country is unique. It's stamped with its own history. It has its own character. We know that class exists. We know that there's an objective reality to the working class, but the class doesn't exist in Australia or New Zealand in any substantial way for itself, with knowledge of itself, with knowledge of its own power. Our task as socialists is to make the working class aware of itself, as a class, aware of its own power. And as with individuals, what's essential to that is to know your own history, to have your own narrative, to have your own stories. And as with individuals, there's pressures, like from outside. Alien pressures that are on you, that try and break up your identity, that try and break up your narrative, your story. We need a relentless struggle as socialists against ideological tendencies that would smash, fragment, and dissolve our own awareness of ourselves as a class. Some statistics first to give you an idea of the empirical reality of working class, sorry, I'm just making sure that there's not pics that I'm missing. Yeah, please, could I have the first pic? Sorry, Honey Harawira, there he is, on the picket line, Portsville. Good stuff. Can you tell me, can you just tune it so that I can see what's up here? Oh yeah, no. Okay, yep, sweet. Just, we'll stick with Honey. Yep, sweet, cool. So, yeah, just some stats. Māori make up 15% of the population of New Zealand, 1/5, roughly. With Pacific Islanders, roughly 20%. But within the working class, a much bigger block than that. So we're talking, you know, maybe 20, maybe 30%, you know, plus within the working class. And you can see that reflected in the immigration statistics to Australia, like it's disproportionately Māori, which tells you all that the immigration from New Zealand to Australia is a working class immigration. These are working people coming over looking for higher wages, looking for better jobs, or looking for jobs at all. For Māori, unemployment is, Māori in general are also poorer, so that unemployment is double at 13%, double the average. Health is much worse in many different ways, which is also reflected in the lifespan being 10 years younger, 10 years shorter on average. And of course, in the prison population, 15% of the population is arrested and imprisoned to make up 50% of the prison population, with Pacific Islanders 60%. So overwhelmingly a racist prison system. Farming is still king in New Zealand, but it's a white business. Farmers boast that they create something around 66% or whatever of the export wealth. They forget about the shearers, the truckers, the freezing workers, the port workers, the railway workers, all of whom are disproportionately Māori, all of whom are absolutely necessary to make that 66% into wealth. Auckland is the biggest city in New Zealand. Almost half the population of New Zealand lives in Auckland. It's the capital of Polynesia. It's the biggest Polynesian city in the world. And South Auckland is the industrial heartland of New Zealand. Overwhelmingly Māori and Pacifica blue-collar workforce. It's the manufacturing engine of the economy. That's the objective reality, but the view that's presented to us, presented to working class people in Aotearoa, is that South Auckland is the land of the living dead. Dole bludgers, povos, drug gangs, atrocious things, hip-hop, all kinds of awful stuff. These are the alien ideological trends that I'm talking about, you know? The ruling class view of the working class that gets projected onto the core part of the working class to smash and fragment and dissolve our common identity. Facts are stubborn things, and that's just as well because we can't act on them until we clear our heads. So let's check out some of the lies that keep us despising ourselves. This is a racist history of New Zealand. Remember that, all right? I don't think anything that's in here, all right, until I say it's the real story, okay? This is the story that you'll hear at a pub. It provides the subtext that makes New Zealand politics make sense. Like a bad joke, it exists in many versions. This is just one, and it's not the worst. In the beginning was a ragtag raft of starving refugees, fleeing from foreign wars and overpopulation, flotsam and jetsam, washed by chance on these shores. The original boat people, landing on an untouched, pristine, 100% pure, you know 100% pure? 100% pure land. As soon as they arrived, they ate or enslaved a peaceful race of primitives called the Maori. The moral of that story is that don't talk about land rights, you're lucky you didn't get eaten. They next ate the moa, which were these like enormous chickens, you think of like Kentucky Fried to the max, who could still insatiable though, they killed and ate one another in an unmitigated round of heathen savagery until, thank God, the arrival of Christianity and Queen Victoria, who brought the gospel and the treaty respectively to New Zealand. This is not old-fashioned. This is modern. Look, here's the latest rehash, the latest foolish rehash. It's published by Penguin. It's written by a respected professor at the Auckland University of Technology Department, Faculty of Maori Development. Paul Moon. I mean, like, this is talk about this horrid practice, this horrid book. The moral of this version, and morals are big in any Victorian version of history, is that the only problem that Māori have, the reason for all of their imprisonment, unemployment, etc. that I told you before, is that they're too Māori. They're not white or Christian enough. Try harder. The successes of Māori activism, such as compensation for stolen land, the Treaty of Waitangi tribunal settlements, are what is creating the biggest problems in New Zealand today. They encourage laziness amongst Māori. They establish an apartheid state where Maori are the new privileged elite. And they bravely call, you know, like people like the former governor of the Reserve Bank bravely shouts out, you know, one law for all, one nation, you know, equality. Yeah? What's especially nauseating is when you get the white South African immigrants to New Zealand who comment on the basis of their experience, you know, like, I've seen apartheid, and look, you know, where you're heading down that road, look out, look out. Yeah? Enough, Australians have enough experience with racist myth-mongering to recognise the pattern. So what's the real story? Now you can start, like, believing this is what I think. What's the next page? Oh, yeah, no, yeah, cool. So, for a start, Maori, or Polynesians, navigated the entire Pacific, like from East Asia, Hawaii, South America, Easter Island, Samoa, New Zealand, a full half a millennia, 500 years before Columbus sailed on his little creaky boat across the Atlantic, across the smallest part of the Atlantic. And far from eating, far from the first arrivals eating the moriori, the first arrivals were the moriori. Like, there was waves of immigration. The Maori were all eaten, as I said. That's not surprising. I don't think I would have resisted it either. Now, what happened, subsequently you have in the north of the country, agriculture, where it's warmer. They had kumara, a kind of sweet potato that grew in the north. So some agriculture. In the south, smaller population, hunter-gatherer. And with that, of course, you have larger societies with agriculture. You have more stratification of those societies. You have war, etc., those things that go with it. Maori society was not as radically egalitarian as Aboriginal society. Maori society was a society that had chiefly bloodlines that you inherited. It wasn't necessarily that the firstborn was going to be the winner. I mean, some of you may have heard of Maui Tiki Tiki Aotearoa. Anybody heard of Maui? Like he fished up the fished up the North Island.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was the youngest. That was the point. You know, he was the youngest, but because he's so clever, he became the best. Yeah. But you know, it was chiefly bloodlines. Yeah. But it wasn't a class society in that chiefs were expected to labour, to work alongside their tribespeople. There's a whakatoki or proverb that reflects that. He toa tawa, he toa e waia, he toa ahu whenua, he toa tuturu. A man of war is a man broken apart. A cultivator is a man who stands firm. So working in cultivation was something that was respected as well. The Māori economy was based around this concept of utu. It was a gift-giving economy. Utu is usually translated as revenge, but actually what it means is reciprocity, you know? So we give you good, we expect good back. You give us evil, you're going to get evil back. It's about balancing, right? Two main ways that this happened. One through war, the other through hospitality. Now, I mean, obviously everybody, war is something that's usually, focused on. Māori were, war was a big part of society. But also hospitality, something that's not necessarily, so well known. Hospitality was a demonstration of power in the same way as war. I mean, what is war? War is the ability to command a whole lot of resources, to command a whole lot of labour into one place, under one authority. That's a demonstration of power. Food is exactly the same thing. What we have here is a stage set up for a hakari, or a feast. And this hakari was given for Governor George Grey, who was a scumbag in South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Unfortunately, he was saved. I just found out he was saved by an Aborigine in the outback, by drinking liquid mud. I think that he shouldn't have bothered, actually. But the point of this was that, you were invited to a feast, yeah? And you turned up and you saw how much food there was, and if you couldn't reciprocate, then you admitted that you were inferior. The pressure was on to try and match that, Similar things in other societies, eh? So that's a hakari. Instead of weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass satisfaction. War existed, slavery existed. Slaves were captured in war, they lost their mana, they lost their status, yeah? So they were slaves. But the economy never rested on slavery, like in ancient Athens, and labour never supported a parasitic ruling class, like for instance in ancient Egypt. But as I said before, not as radically egalitarian as Aboriginal society. Contact with Contact with Europeans, traumatic, as it was everywhere. Two main reasons, muskets and measles, same as everywhere. Muskets in a feuding society, it's a recipe for disaster. The northern tribes got the muskets first and they went off to settle all of those utu, all of those scores, yeah? Of course, they could settle them in a much more comprehensive and devastating way than ever before, and the pressure was on an arms race in the first half of the 19th century, where all the tribes had to get muskets until some kind of equilibrium was reached, and utu kind of worked again. In the meantime, thousands did lose their lives. Far more devastating, disease. Disease was like as everywhere, particularly in the South Island, where many tribes in certain places just became shadows of themselves. Devastating, but not fatal, because contact brought two other really good things besides muskets and measles. Two other things that, like on their own, could have turned around the whole situation within, 50 years. There was the pig and the potato. Pig, obviously, I mean, it's a great protein source. Lives anywhere. It's staple, of Polynesian cuisine. In fact, it's kind of interesting that it never made it to New Zealand. Anyway, potato could be grown all the way down as far south as, where I'm from, in Waitangi, where, it's just about the only thing that grows. And this would have, would have created an agricultural boom that, could have led to a population rise if it weren't for the loss of land in the second half of the 19th century. So it's possible to imagine in Aotearoa with, instead of 4 million, Pākehā and Maori, 4 million Maori, it's actually it's not inconceivable. And I suppose part of what I'm trying to say in this talk too is that history's never set. All of these historians try and portray this is the way that we came to be New Zealand, yeah? What I'm trying to say is that resistance at every stage made a difference to history and shaped history. The earlier settlers were whalers and sealers who provided a lot of advantages of trade. They generally were integrated into Maori society through marriage and were dependent on Maori for food and for society. Also, really significant tribes entered into trade in a big way. So, you had flax, wheat and flour mills, and whaling and sealing. All of those industries, tribes would pool their resources, buy whaling ships, buy trading ships, and were plying the sea between Australia and New Zealand. And here's a flag that's the flag of the United Confederation of United Tribes of New Zealand. That was a flag that was put together, they signed a Declaration of Independence in order to have a flag that they could trade under, colours that they could trade under. In fact, Māori were able to outcompete the early settlers because they had access to land and they had access to labour that Pākehā just couldn't compete with. So it's this interesting period of communally owned trade and agriculture, tribally owned trade and agriculture, which was outcompeting the British. And, when people talk about being outclassed in an evolutionary struggle and so on, same as everywhere, smashing communal organisation is essential for capitalism. It's not always more efficient at all. Modern Māori capitalists, and there are capitalists, there's $39 billion in assets that are owned by tribal corporations, claim that this trading period proves that Māori are innately or naturally or culturally capitalist. There's no parallel and there's no continuity. These were collectively owned, tribally worked. There was no wage labour involved. The modern, for instance, again, Ngāi Tahu, the tribe from the South Island, has big fishery quotas that were given back to them, but instead of collectively working those fisheries, and there were plenty of Māori fishermen as well, Kaitahu fishermen. They sold them on the open market, which means that they're now worked by foreign crews generally, and enslaved conditions, usually Filipino. So this was a strange period that was really, quite an interesting period. And it couldn't last, of course. It couldn't be allowed to compete. And there was a principle that ran through the thread, a common thread running through all of the settler governments, which was, to quote one of the first premiers, Sio, we must detribalize the natives, destroy, if it is at all possible, the principle of communism that runs through all of their institutions. A very conscious statement. this period, I think, you know, we recognise it couldn't have lasted, but nonetheless it's an inspiration for workers' control of production in Aotearoa in future. We've had it before. All right, settlement. Settlement wasn't a given again. But Britain was reluctant to annex, and there's 3 reasons for that. Well, actually, there's the overall economic problems that Britain was facing in that period. In the first half of the 1800s, there's the Irish causing trouble, so like Wolfe Tone and the United Irishmen in the early part, like there's still like lots of trouble in Ireland. Rural uprisings like the swing riots, and then in the cities, support for reform, radical parliamentary reform, or for a republic on the French model, like so revolution, was running high in Britain at that time. That they did annex New Zealand was for 2 reasons. 1, French, so inter-imperialist rivalry, the fear of the French taking over. 2, Wakefield. Wakefield and the New Zealand Company. Wakefield is actually like you know, he's our claim to fame because, like, he's the reason why Marx wrote about New Zealand in chapter 25. Chapter 25, volume 1 of Capital, yeah? We get a mention. Wakefield had this brilliant idea. You reduce surplus population in the United Kingdom, so get rid of, like, all of those, you know, troublesome Irish and peasants and everything like that, all the unemployed, get rid of them, send them to Britain and create a new Britain in New Zealand. Sorry, send them to New Zealand, create a new Britain. The plan goes like this. You buy land cheap from Maori, you sell land dear to settlers. The settlers then have to work for wages to get enough money to buy the land, and then you use the profit that you make from their wages to buy more land cheap from Māori to get more settlers in, so that there's always too many settlers and the price of labour stays low, and you create, hey presto, a class of wage slaves in Aotearoa. That's a very clever idea. Wakefield understood very well the lure of land to the dispossessed peasantry. Remember, between like 60 years before 1830, 6 million acres of collectively owned land in England was privatised. It was enclosed, 6 million acres. So there was a real push, right? But like Wakefield only used it as bait. It was never intended that people would have access to land. It was a lure to create a wage slave class. The trick, though, was to get a treaty, because the British were not strong enough to actually invade. Until there were enough settlers in the country that they could actually pose a military challenge to the Māori had too much power to challenge. And so the way that they did that was to send away Hobson. Oh yeah, sorry, this is your Wakefield people. This is here, so they're all in the slums and like miserable. This is there, you know, like meat on the table, everybody's happy, the children are laughing. Massive advertising campaign, you know, Sachi and Sachi of the day, like trying to get the wage slaves lured over to, look at all that meat. Wow. Fat baby. Yeah, the treaty came in 3 parts. What's next to do? Oh no, so the treaty comes in 3 parts. The first, 3 parts but 2 treaties. That's really important. Like there's the treaty in English, there's the treaty in Māori, Te Tiriti, and that's the one that was signed. And they're quite different, right? The first one in English, like gives, 3 articles. In English, the Queen gets sovereignty. In Māori, the Queen gets governorship, kawanatanga. The second article comes in 2 parts. The first guarantees the tribes possession, in other words, property rights. In Māori, the tribes are guaranteed chieftainship, tino rangatiratanga, which is a lot close to sovereignty. Yeah? The second part is the whole purpose of this treaty, which gives the Crown the monopoly on land sales, which was the whole point. You had to have a monopoly to keep the price of land high. The third gives Māori the privilege of being British subjects, of which more later. Now, it's interesting because, like, this has become Holy Writ in New Zealand, you know? This treaty is, like, studied, it's, like, in schools, it's, like, you know, people refer to it all the time. Tupou reminded me that, like, before the election, one of the most watched TV programs was this massive debate between the far-right, former governor of the Reserve Bank and Awami Workers Party about, like, legal philosophy. What did this treaty mean, New Zealanders are interested in it. It's quite exciting. But actually, all that it is about land sales. And land was sold. The South Island was sold first, and there was a massive influx in settlers, and as there was a massive influx in settlers, there was a change, obviously, in the Māori attitude. Māori had no idea that there were going to be that many settlers coming in. There's one chief in Wellington who, the story goes, like, broke down in tears when he saw a New Zealand company ship landing in Wellington and thousands and thousands and thousands, well, 1,000 people coming off it. So 2,000 Pākehā in New Zealand in 1840. 12 years later, 28,000, and the numbers kept on increasing from there. 12 years later, a settler government was created in New Zealand. It was a democratic government, which is great. If you were, of course, a white, a man, and you owned a lot of land. Actually, Māori could own, Māori, they never said specifically Māori couldn't, but the problem was that they owned it collectively. So, you couldn't have, like, you had to own an individual title. So Māori were totally disqualified. There's far more Māori at this stage than there are Pākehā, but you've got a government that is allowed to tax the Māori. And this is the point, the privilege of being a British subject. You suddenly find out the same thing as what the Americans found out, no taxation without representation. Well, this was taxation without any representation. Māori were taxed, their money was used to buy their land from them, was used to move more Pākehā settlers over, was used to provide economic subsidies to those settlers which were not available to Māori, and was used finally to keep armies in the field to smash Māori military resistance. Māori money, And war started very quickly, 5 years after the treaty. The first war, Hone Heke, chopped down a British flagpole. Once, twice, 3 times, They kept putting it up and chopped it down again until finally they sent an army to try and stop him. It was, that was the first war. He was defeated, more or less, he was defeated by a combination, because the British could keep an army in the field year round, and because he was opposed by other chiefs from his own tribe. Including Tamati Wakanene, which interestingly enough is Hone Harawira's middle name, so history's always a bit complicated, These are called kupapa, kupapa troops. They're like troops that are on the side of the British. They're settling scores with these other, with the other tribes that rebel. This was recognised to be a problem, so there's war that war's breaking out, and the British are always backed by other Māori, and so there was this movement called Kingitanga, or the King movement, which tried to get as many tribes to back a central authority, a king, that would ban all land sales. And this was reasonably successful. In the central North Island, where the Kingitanga was strong, a king was elected, and no land was sold, and Māori law ruled all. They had a monopoly on force. They had a state in the central North Island. They even had their newspaper. They had a newspaper war, propaganda war with the government. And one of the main issues in that war was Haiti. Right? So they were learning from around the world. They're looking at Haiti and they're like, the Kirimangu, the blacks, have overthrown the Kirima in this place Haiti over there. They just chucked them all out. And then the government would reply, oh, it was actually a really bad thing. They're really, evil people. Of course, the British couldn't suffer this, and so they invaded. They found an excuse, they invaded. And this is the point, they had to destroy the communist, or the tribal, what they called communist. They had to destroy the tribal mode of production that existed in order to allow, first to get the land, but also to stop Māori from competing. Māori weren't given the option of competing on an economic framework. They demonstrated formidable military skills. Those of you that are interested can read James Pillger's book, The New Zealand Wars. I haven't yet because I'm not actually that interested. But because it seems to me it was land wars. The idea of making it New Zealand Wars and praising the Māori military skills is to sort of say, well, we beat you, but you put on a good game. Good work, mate. Like we're all New Zealanders now kind of thing. Whereas Māori were comprehensively, despite heroic resistance, the New Zealand state was able to establish a monopoly of force and to create a racist colonial settler state. There were, of course, like resistance continued all the way through the rest of that of the 19th century. There were rebellions, particularly around like prophetic movements, which is sort of like, you know, like along the kind of like Rastafari, you know, those of you familiar with that, like so Old Testament language, and like liberation, you know, like a really strong like drive towards liberation, and a mixture of Maori traditions with the Old Testament. I'm going to name some of these leaders, yeah, because it's important to acknowledge them. Te Ua Haumere, Te Kotiare Kirangi, Te Whiti o Rongo Mai, Te Maiharoa, Rua Kenana. So these are some people that I just mentioned quickly who's, you know, we call on them, you know, like, and we call on like their tradition, yeah? And pay respect to them. There was also like a very strong assimilationist thread in Māori politics, symbolised best by this fellow. No, Dole, sorry, Dole. Sorry, now skip that one, yeah. This is Rua Kenana here. He's a very interesting character. He was a tūhoi prophet who was arrested in the Oreweras in 1916, so the same year as the Easter Rising as well. You know, like the same year as, you know, they put one of New Zealand's Irish bishops on trial for treason for supporting the Easter Rising. You also got Rua Kenana here. So that usual thing of like the ruling class of Britain, you know, like actually like they're always running scared and they're always a minority and there's always lots of different groups, you know, and lots of different, you know, they're fighting fires in all different directions. Rua Kenana though also like to, just to remember that we had those terror raids recently. That invasion of Tūhoi land was repeated from 1916 in almost exactly the same kind of way. There's all kinds of historical parallels. It's a living tradition. People are aware of it. All right, next. Apirana Ngata. He was like the most assimilationist MP that New Zealand's ever had. I mean, like, he did probably more than anybody at this time, in this period, to like keep Māori traditions alive when the Māori race was supposed to be dying. You know? That was the common idea. They've been outclassed in an evolutionary struggle. Apirana Ngata worked very hard to try and create an economic base with small dairy farms and to try and create, you know, keep Māori culture alive, and built a lot of marae up and down the country. But he paid a very high price for it. And the price that he paid was to act as the recruiting sergeant for the war, for the First World War, for the British Empire. So nobody did more than Apirana Ngata to get Māori to go and fight in the First World War, which of course, like in certain places such as like Aotearoa, which is like the marae close to where we are, you know, like a generation was killed. So a high price was paid. He got the gratitude of the British state. It's on the $50 note. Yeah? I wish I could see more of him actually. What's next? Sorry, so like, what happened next was like proletarianization. And this is a similar process that happened all over the world. There's end of the Second World War, there's an arms race. The arms race sustains the economic growth that like followed after the war, creating a long boom. In New Zealand, primarily the Korean War created a massive like demand for wool, which like, you know, fed like industrialization in New Zealand. Now, in the United States, it's Southern blacks, of course, that get drawn into the cities of the north. In the United Kingdom, it's Indians and Jamaicans. In Germany, the Turks. In New Zealand, it was Maori and Pacific Islanders. Maori were driven as well by continued loss of their land, so loss of their economic base in the countryside. So they became proletarianized over a period like 1926 through to 1917. 1926, only 8% of Maori lived on the land. And I want to mention also Waramu Taupōtiki Ratana, who was like, you know, the last of these prophetic figures, or, you know, like in the 20th century. And he was like a prophet, like also based in these traditions, who cut a deal with the Labour Party that delivered like the vote of Māori, of the Māori seats. There's there was at that time 4 Māori seats, delivered that to Labour for 50 or 60 years. It was an alliance. And the alliance was based on this view, right? And he actually, I mean, like credit to him, like as a prophet, like he saw what was happening to Māori people well before, you know, the urbanisation was complete. He saw the alignment of the interests between Māori with the working class. And he went to London one time with the Haka Party, and the High Commissioner there, you know, was quite happy to have him singing and dancing and stuff like that, but he wouldn't give him an audience to speak to him seriously. The High Commissioner wouldn't. So he was on Westminster Bridge, and he made this prophecy. And it's worth thinking about this, like all of those awful buildings on campus when you think about it, yeah? When all your stone houses are destroyed in time to come, then will the carpenters, the blacksmiths, and the shoemakers be in power, and I will be the government. Māori were part of the proletarianisation, were in unions, so union leadership, you know, coming up through the unions become a very important part of like Māori identity, especially in the most militant unions, the meat workers. To give you an idea of their militancy, in the 60s and 70s, meat workers earned more money than university lecturers. They were actually like, you know, finally some justice in the world, yeah? In 1951, there's the most famous dispute, or like, you know, a civil war, an industrial war in New Zealand was the 1951 waterfront lockup. A state of emergency declared, like the army called in martial law pretty much. You're not allowed to give a piece of food to a striker's child. It's against the law, you can be arrested for that, all that kind of stuff. The freezing workers coming out like in support of that, like, you know, nationwide strike, and they're coming for those big demos, and like the words on their lips are the same words as were, you know, from the land wars, from Riwi Maniapoto, ka whawhai tonu mātou, ake, ake, ake. Which means the struggle continues forever and ever and ever. These fellas here, this is Ngā Tamatoa, who, those of you at John's session last night, he mentioned. This was part of like the wave of working class militancy that swept the world after 1968, and New Zealand run, you know, 1979. No, that's not strictly true. There's the strike wave, and with it there's like radicalisation within Māori politics as like urban Māori start to speak up and start to protest against the racist state. The occupation of Bastion Point, which was in Auckland, tribal land that was occupied with the support of the trade unions. Those of you who've heard Davey Thompson talking over the weekend about green bans, the green ban was put on Bastion Point. Takapara folk to like stop development to protect Māori land, so that alliance was really important. The high point though, oh no, yeah, okay. Sorry, I thought I had a Springbok tour picture here. The high point probably of like this anti-racist struggle in this last period is the Springbok tour. And what you have there is the militancy and solidarity that Māori workers have discovered, and Māori and Pacific Island and Pākehā workers have discovered in successful strikes, in a series of successful strikes, being brought into, combining with disgust at the crimes of the apartheid regime and massive demonstrations against racism in South Africa and in New Zealand. I don't have as much time as I thought to get into like, so I apologise, but since like this period, like since urbanisation, Māori have been like at the vanguard of the working class. So a minority within the working class, but one of the most homogenous blocks within the working class, and at the vanguard in some of the most militant struggles. So that, I mean, like just to, yeah, I mean also like solidarity, yeah? Like the traditions of solidarity, like the traditions of, you know, like sticking up for your mates, not being a scab, all of that stuff, like that's a tribal kind of a culture, it's a cultural difference that's incredibly important for like our traditions of working class militancy in New Zealand. And there's only just some small examples of the many things that we can learn. I want to talk quickly about the empire striking back. So the forward march of our side, working class Māori, Pacific Islander, internationalist, seemed irresistible. In 1984, the arch-conservative Prime Minister Piggy Muldoon, Piggy, I love that name, was voted out in 1984, and it seemed like a new dawn. But the 1984 Labour government were scum of the worst kind. They launched a pro-business blitzkrieg that blindsided unions and smashed working class militancy. At the same time, they introduced nuclear-free laws to make New Zealand a nuclear-free zone. They introduced a women's ministry, and they had a policy of honouring the treaty. Māori was made an official language. We became a bicultural state. So, you know, you may meet New Zealanders who are quite smug about all this stuff. You know, it's like, oh, you know, we treat our Māori a lot better than what you fellas treat your Aborigines. Like, aren't we good? Yeah? But at the same time, you can tell them, at the same time, between 87 and 89, 1/5 of all Māori lost their jobs. So, you know, you're giving out some crumbs on the one hand with treaty settlements to an area elite, and on the other hand, you're taking millions from working class Māori families. Nonetheless, like, despite these these hits, the Māori protest movement has continued to be the most militant section of working class, you know? Like, all through this downturn, when strikes are at their lowest ever point, when Pākehā generally are not protesting at all, like the biggest demonstration in recent times was probably the seabed foreshore demonstration. It's a almost entirely Māori march, it's a Maori issue, but the people are all working class. Except for, you know, a small layer, scumbags, who, out of that movement, formed the Maori Party. The Maori Party was a great thing, you know, like we're all Māori, like Māori are really pissed off at like the government. We'll make a party, and then we'll go into coalition with the Tories. What? That's a bit strange. That brings us to the present, yeah? Because, like, sorry, yeah, Ruatuki, so, yeah, no, yeah, we can flip back to that one now, yeah? No? Yes. Here's Annette Sykes. On the picket line, she's the deputy leader, eh? Yeah? You know, this is her, yeah, this is on the picket line in her home area with her cousin, you know, like, with like, come on bro, come join us, union, all good. Yeah? Mana split on a clear class basis, and you can see it here. But to kind of give you like a bit more an idea of like, you know, why freezing works are so important, you know, like what they symbolize in New Zealand. You remember that farming's a white business, and freezing work is disproportionately Māori. Freezing works used to be really highly paid. They've been slashed since then. But now, like, we have a massive offensive from the bosses, like with 700 locked out last year and 1,000 locked out this year. Last year they were asking for 30% pay cut. Now they're asking for a pay cut plus loss of conditions. They're trying to cut conditions and wages to the bone, trying to create like a meatpacking industry that's just like slavery. How does it work? In the south, in the south of the South Island, there was a snowstorm 2 years ago, and like heaps of lambs died. The farmers, of course, you know, like, oh no, we're in trouble, help, help. The government comes and helps them, you know, yeah, all the farmers get money. The freezing workers, they get a short season and a wage cut, 10% wage cut, your season's cut by a month. Meanwhile, of course, there's very little lamb, so the price of lamb goes up, so the farmers, like, get paid again, yeah? So the only people that are suffering in that picture are the freezing workers. And that's just a little picture of how race and class in New Zealand is so intimately tied together. And you can't divide it, you can't dissolve it. It's hardwired and it's intertwined. And if we can just flick back quickly, like to that previous image. So this is one of the like police thugs in the RIVERA. They came in like to raid like this Māori village because supposedly they'd been having terrorist training in the bushes, napalm and bombs, and like they were going to like catapult a bus and squash the Prime Minister. I'm not joking, actually. That was part of the SIS, SIS. Like they take somebody in the car. Hey, wouldn't it be a choice if we like catapulted a bus and squashed the Prime Minister? And you know, 5 long years. One of the defendants, Tuhoi Lambert, died like. Without, you know, having his name clear, died on charges. 5 long, hard years for these people. And at the end, what, you know, some unlicensed firearms, yeah? And the defense lawyer, for me, summed up the entire case. He said, Māori plus guns equals crime. I would like to know how many thousands of unlicensed firearms white farmers have And I would like to see a few police raids. Actually, no, I don't really. I'd rather just get rid of the cops. Now, what we offer to, mana, like in terms of our perspective, like, you know, we place an emphasis on the right to strike in industrial relations as socialists, you know, like we like to, you know, make that a big part of the policy, and it is part of the policy, but, you know, we'd like to elaborate on that. And the other thing is that we also, like, put an emphasis on internationalism, obviously. There's many Pacific Island workers in New Zealand. We think that they should have the right to free health and education. We also, obviously, like, are against borders, full stop. So, I mean, that's the kind of push that we need to make. Which, like, the point of it is that it explodes left nationalism, you know? Which is a real curse in New Zealand. Like, left nationalism. And in Australia, people don't walk around, like, wearing Australia t-shirts, you know? Like, in New Zealand, people, oh, they do. But the thing is, like, when they do, you know that they're right-wing, eh? Yeah? In New Zealand, like, they're Labour voters, they're Green voters. They think of themselves as lefties, you know? It's like New Zealand, all good. I mean, like, and that's that smugness, you know, of left nationalism. It's a real curse in New Zealand. And the idea that, you know, like, we're better than the Aussies, you know, because the Aussies were so awful to the Aborigines. You know, like, we're nice to the Maori, and they're kind of like a higher class of native anyway, yeah? You know, that kind of racism, like, that goes along with that left nationalism. We need to smash it and we need to explode it. And one of the ways, you know, there's two ways of doing it. One is, like, pushing the idea of mana Pacifica. So we have, like, mana branches that are, like, you know, a wing that's Pacifica. Developing that, strengthening that. And the other side, because, I mean, that perspective is, like, then we can have, like, an actual Polynesian majority in Aotearoa. Right? Which is an interesting concept. You know, you can actually overturn the whole, like, white settler colonial basis of the state. And the other thing is that, like, mana branches in Australia that can be oriented towards the land rights struggle here, you know, and the refugee rights struggle here, and actually play, you know, a really important contribution to internationalism between, like, you know, like Indigenous internationalism as well, that strengthens, like, the working class and strengthens our side and smashes some of those self-displacing myths that are designed to keep us in servitude. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.